Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible Lessons, where we're going to get some church on. Yeah, we the
Or
usual team
synagogue on.
assembled. Okay, that's right. We are still in the Old Testament, aren't we? Okay, so who wants to? Does anybody have anything to say or want to take over? Go ahead.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I just want. No, go ahead.
yeah, just a couple things to keep in mind here. So this chapter, of course, we're doing the binding of Isaac, right? Big story. Everybody knows the gist. There are going to be there's probably going to be a good amount of discussion about where this would have come from, whether it was taken from like a different source before it was written down, and then it was, kind of, maybe some details were added here and there for the author's purposes. That's one hypothesis. Another one is it's just, made up whole cloth for the author's purposes, uh, and those seem to be the biggest strands, but I guess they are mutually exclusive, right? It's got to be one or the other, really. Uh, so we're gonna be there. There is still debate about that. Is my general point, but from as far as I can tell, it really does seem like it's from the uh, like it was just made up whole cloth, and the details in it will show much later dating, and it really doesn't seem like there's anything necessarily ancient. Like, when I say ancient, I mean ancient for like 500 or 600 BCE. So ancient for them. So before that. Uh, so that is generally what I mean. So if there's not like a tradition that stems back to 1500 BCE is my point.
Okay, and I know that Tomer was excited for this episode.
Yeah, because usually I prepare like 3 pages of commentary. For this, I have 6 pages of commentary. So I've been prepared.
Okay.
And also, tomorrow is the start of the Jewish holiday Rosh Hashanah, which is the beginning of the Jewish year. And I've read that on the second day, the Binding of Isaac is actually read in synagogues. Second day of Rosh Hashanah. So I don't know. Coincidence? No, but
Okay.
There's a good deal of interesting scholarship coming up on this, and I think that's very valuable and very good. But the thing about this story that is always going to be the most important to me is its total, utter immorality and how the method in which it was adopted by Christianity specifically, I can't speak as much to Judaism, has produced so much evil and inhumanity. And I am absolutely coming down with the wrath of hell on this passage, because this story, I'm very interested in learning about authorship and everything else, but the effects of this story in the real world are horrific, and I am not letting that go.
Yeah, but we will get into that. All right. So who wants to read?
we should first discuss how we should read this, because I think everyone has a commentary for each verse, at least from my end.
We probably should go in chunks.
Yeah.
Welcome
So-
back, Lalandra.
So we'll do like 1 to 5, 5 to 10, and so forth.
Well, I
Yeah,
would
let's-
say that there are always natural breaks in the story, like when there's either like a scene change, or when there's like a new speaker or something, or when they're discussing a new topic. I would say that there are natural breaks. So like if we go through a reading and we see, oh, okay, so there should be enough here for like some actual good analysis, then we can probably go into it.
Yeah. Just
Mhm.
anytime the story says something utterly ridiculous.
Okay, well, listen, we'll be here for
So
that.
every verse.
Yeah.
I'll be every word.
I think we should read 1, 5, 5, 10, and so forth, so we can have
Okay.
consistency.
Go ahead, Tomer. Do it.
Yeah, so I'll do it. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you."
Okay,
Okay.
I just want to interject something real quick. I know that this is supposed to be God spoken, God breathed history and all that, but he is riding to Moria. And
Well,
you know what the dwarves discovered when they dug too deep.
okay.
Sorry.
Probably the biggest thing about this section that we've read so far, I would say, in my opinion, is where it says that Isaac is his only son.
Yeah.
That is
Well,
that
this
is
is
the
happened to
most interesting
Ishmael.
part to me.
In fairness,
And-
they literally just sent Ishmael out into the desert to die with like 1 day's worth of rations. So
And-
I
And
actually
also
have
because it's a legitimate one, right? He's a legitimate son.
yeah.
So it really depends, because there have been apparently some commentators, some translators who use favored son instead, because it's just like I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce the Hebrew. I'm sure Tomer could do that probably, but it seems like they are very similar words, favored and only, from the transliteration that I see at least. And it seems like they did do that change sometimes. But the only legitimate one would be an interpretation of that.
Have you noticed the family values in each of God's chosen favorite people?
Yeah, he doesn't even question it. It's just like, okie dokie, I'll stop my son.
I just threw the other kid in the trash. Why not?
Let's go take this one up a mountain and stab him. I'm sure it'll be fine. Now,
Okay.
I have a question for Tomer specifically.
Okay.
I have heard from some Jews that their interpretation of this story was that Abraham did the wrong thing to sacrifice his son and that was a mistake. Is that a common apologetic in Judaism? Is that a fringe opinion? Is that everybody but the Orthodox? Where
I
does
don't
that
know.
stand?
I don't know. I wanted to get to this because I have a commentary from Maimonides, but first I will.
Fair enough. That comes later.
Okay, so let's go to the first verse and the sometime later, and it could also literally it's translated as "and after these things," like in King James Bible, I think. So there is
Linear
a
storytelling. Yeah. Okay.
so there is a. Someone wants to.
Nothing. Go ahead.
Okay, so the reason that God tried Abraham, so there is the boring explanation and the not boring explanation. And I'll start with the not boring explanation. So, according to Chazal in Sanhedrin 89b, guess who wants to challenge God?
Satan?
Yes, it's Satan. It reads,
Ugh.
It reads, Satan said before the Holy One, blessed be he, Master of the universe, this old man, you favored him with a product of the womb at 100 years of age. From the entire feast that he prepared, did he not have even one dove or one pigeon to sacrifice before you as a thanks offering? God said to Satan, did Abraham prepare the feast for any reason but for his son? If I say to him, sacrifice your son before me, he would immediately slaughter him. Immediately after these matters, the verse states, God tried Abraham.
So this is a
Yeah.
Job situation, according to this commentator.
Yes, a similar story appears in the book of Jubilees 17, verse 19 to 25, where Satan is called Mastema. And there is another story which I find quite funny.
And if anyone's interested in the Book of Jubilees stuff, we did a reading of that on my channel, so we did cover that. If anyone's interested later on.
Okay, so
Okay.
there is another story which I found hilarious in Tanchuma Vayera 18:1, which reads the following: Ishmael had said to Isaac, I am superior to you, for I underwent circumcision at the age of 13 and underwent the pain that accompanied it, while you were merely 8 days old at the time of your circumcision and could feel no pain. Why, even if your father had wished to slaughter you, you would not have known the difference. If you had been 13 years old, you could not have tolerated the anguish that accompanies circumcision. Isaac reiterated, That is not so. Even if the Holy One, blessed be he, should command my father, slaughter thy son Isaac, I would not resist. Immediately after, scripture states, sometime later, God tested Abraham. It's
Okay.
karma.
Yeah, and God needs to test things because he's making bets with the devil.
Yeah, that's the
reading
traditional
into it.
explanation.
They really need to stop having these drunk poker nights.
Yeah.
Like, fucking stop betting on us. Okay,
It's
okay.
leave us
I mean,
out of it.
it's also important to remember that Satan at this
Yeah.
in this time period was not like the devil with the pitchfork that we kind of think of today. It wasn't that kind of thing. No,
It was just God's drinking buddy.
yeah, he was just the adversary essentially. In ancient Israelite religion, Satan would have been a kind of like a judge. He would be the one to kind of make accusations against people. Like he would be, he was like a judge on the earth, I guess. That
Isn't
was is like
Ahriman the opposer, kind of the sort of taking the contrary view to test things, kind of a thing.
Yeah, but not in Judaism. That was a Christian idea that the Christians reached back past Judaism and took that element.
To make him like Ahriman. Okay.
Yeah,
No,
but
I mean
Judaism doesn't have an Ahriman perspective.
Okay, so he's more like like a prosecuting attorney, like someone who the left hand of God comes in and tests things and pokes and prods and sees what's going on in the dirty underbelly, kind of thing.
Sure, yeah. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. So if that was the and the reason I say ancient Israelite and not Jewish is because those would have been quite different. Like the way that the religion changes over time is drastic. So that's why if I'm talking about like ancient Judaism, like I just say ancient Israelite religion because it's not really the Judaism that we know.
Yeah, Lalondra, you started to say something there. Did you want to?
Was Satan like a distinct entity, or was that just a generic name for anybody that opposed or was an adversary in Bible stories?
I think it was a distinct entity, but it wasn't like this force of evil necessarily that we think of.
And it seems to be titled as well.
He seems to be treated as an officer of God.
Yeah, essentially. He's part of
the
that
guy who does
court.
dirty work. Yeah.
No, Eluch, go on.
I was going to say, and it seems to be a title as well, because it always says Ha-Shaitan. So it's like the Satan. So it's like describing the role as opposed to the name.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm going to get that on a t-shirt.
Ha-Shaitan.
Yeah.
I've said that this was the not boring explanation, and now I have the boring explanation, which does not include Satan. So Maimonides, in his work, The Guide for the Perplexed, Book 3, Chapter 24, writes about the reason for the trials in the Bible in general. He says, the sole object of all the trials mentioned in Scripture is to teach man what he ought to do or believe, so that the event which forms the actual trial is not the end desired. It is but an example for our instruction and guidance. Hence the words, and he quotes from Deuteronomy 13:3, to know whether you love, etc., do not mean that God desires to know whether they love God, for he already knows it. But to know has here the same meaning as in the phrase, and he quotes from Exodus 31:13, to know that I am the Lord who make you holy, i.e., that all nations shall know that I am the Lord who made you holy. And he further adds that in the binding of Isaac, there are two great ideas of the faith. The first is to show the extent and limit of the fear and the love of God. And the second is to show how the prophets believed in the truth of that which came to them from God by way of inspiration. That was Maimonides.
Yes,
I have
inspiration.
And another one from Nachmanides. He writes that God tries only righteous people, as seen in Psalms 11:5, which quotes, "The Lord examines the righteous," and in Bereshit Rabbah 34:2, just the same. He writes, For knowing that the righteous will do his will, he desires to make him even more upright, and so he commands him to undertake a test. But he does not try the wicked, who would not obey. Thus, all trials in the Torah are for the good of the one who is being tried.
Except, I mean, yeah, I guess for the ones that we do have, sure, that would make sense. But God in the ancient conception would definitely be also the one trying the wicked.
Yeah.
It's all going to happen like, at the end of days, right? Like that's like the big judgment where everyone's going to get tried. So I like how they're conveniently leaving that one out. But the stories that we do get, yeah, I suppose like they're the righteous ones.
If you're talking about undergoing a trial in the here and now, which will show your worth by your actions, then yeah, that only happens to the righteous. But I read a lot of old theologians and stuff, Ambrose, Augustine, Calvin. They're horrible, but I want to know the origins of things. And one thing that always struck me is that trials in the sense of hardships, there's always a justification. If you're a righteous person, then God is trying you because you're righteous, and he disciplines those he loves. But if evil comes on someone you don't like, well, then God is punishing them because they are evil, and this is a sign of his ill favor. There's always an excuse. There's always a reason why whatever happened totally fits in with your belief system, and you should just do more of what I say because this is the proof of it. And then if
It's
good
fun.
times to them, it's because to bad people, it's because God is generous to them because he knows they're going to be destroyed in the end. So he's giving them a tiny taste of happiness now. And if good times come to the righteous, then it's a reward. So it's just, there's always an excuse. There's always
It's
an
funny.
excuse.
It's funny how hard to distinguish the way that he treats the righteous and the way that he treats the wicked is at times. It's like this is the way that he actually treats somebody who's righteous. Go sacrifice your son. This is a good.
It's almost as if sometimes good things happen and sometimes bad things happen.
Don't talk nonsense.
All right, I'm going to read
And
some
this,
chat.
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Lena.
And this part that it is, you're going to see a lot of the same testing your faith story, as if God is insecure, like he doesn't already know that Abraham trusts him. You trust me, Abraham? Take your son up to the mountain and offer him as an offering to me. To prove it. Why does he need to prove it to God? And then it's like if somebody, your father, asks you to kill your puppy, hey, and then at the last minute he goes, no, I just wanted to see if you trusted me. It's like, it's abusive, manipulative.
It's
Yeah,
psychotic.
because that's what omniscient beings do. The beings that know everything, they need to test stuff.
Well, they need to torture you so that they can show off to the people that they hate.
He did that a lot in
Yeah,
Exodus.
That's a mature and secure thing to do.
All right, I'm going to read a couple of these chats because they are stacking up. All right, so the Foolish Thinker says, have you seen the new poll where 65% of evangelical Christians don't believe in original sin and 45% of evangelical Christians don't believe Jesus wasn't God? I've always been confused by people who can read the Bible and say that they read the Bible and not understand that Jesus is not Jehovah.
Depends on which gospel you read, and because it's in John, it's pretty much he's trying to equate him with God in there.
Yeah. The thing is, and I think I've talked about this before, and I'm sure once we get there, I'll go into more detail. So with John, the first 3 verses, right? Like that's where he's like identifying Jesus with God. That the Son, that he was with God and he was God, that kind of thing. So the Greek doesn't. The Greek is actually kind of debatable there because they use an article sometimes and no article other times. So it could be an adjectival function of the noun, like when it just says theos instead of hotheos. So it could be like the if I don't have a Greek New Testament on me, but it could be that Jesus was could be understood as Jesus was divine instead of Jesus was God. So that is another way to understand it. Actually, Tertullian even argued for that understanding, weirdly enough. So I think he actually kind of made a good point there when it comes to the Greek.
Yeah.
So there is it depends on how you translate it, right?
Yeah. And there was lots of debate amongst the early Christians with different sects going off in different directions. Some of them saying, yes, he is God, he's the same thing. The other one saying, yes, he was actually just a man. And this weird idea that he was this man who ended up being possessed by this thing called the Christ as well, who abandoned him at the last minute.
I've heard that
which was
one.
really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Aaron, you wanted to know how it happens. There's the reason that books like My Utmost for His Highest were written, that there's pamphlets of daily bread given out at evangelical churches just free to take, because reading the Bible according to a devotional gives you a scripture and an interpretation so that you can read the whole Bible through. You can go through the Bible once a year, every year, and never actually have an original thought about it, because you're reading it through this script that tells you this is what this means, this is what it's linked to, this is what this means, this is what it's linked to. And they have found justifications for everything that they want it to say. So you read it and read it and read it and read it and read it, and yet you never read it.
Yeah. The
Gotcha.
Jehovah's Witnesses do a similar thing. They, with their pamphlets, they have like this explanation, this is the lesson for today, and then they give you the verses to say, oh yes, the Bible confirms this. But
Yeah,
you never
absolutely. Go
actually read
into
in context.
any evangelical church, any Lutheran, Presbyterian, Baptist, any of them, they will have a little pamphlet called Our Daily Bread. You can just take it. It's about this big, and it will have this week's Daily Bread Bible reading selections with cutesy stories and, interpretations all the way along. And
Okay.
they have those for every type of reading system for the Bible, for every week of the day of the year, all of them.
All right. So the next one is Miss Lud says, do you think that the Israelites who compiled the story wanted exactly to start a discussion about whether Abraham's choices are in fact immoral?
It's hard to say.
There doesn't seem to be any consideration that what he was doing was immoral.
There's no
It's like,
there's no real like discussion here, because usually if they want to do something like that, they have a dialogue. They insert a
Yeah.
dialogue.
Yeah.
And in terms of the morality of this, that's not really part of the discussion.
There is a lot after the fact, like in commentaries and stuff like that, but not in the actual verse.
okay.
He seems to be highly praised for his choices, though. It doesn't seem like it's seen as immoral at all. He's seen as super righteous for doing this.
Yeah.
It has a very barbaric, primitive perspective where everything is about hierarchical authority and everything is about doing what the most important person tells you to do. And then if they tell you to do the wrong thing and you do it, you are righteous because you were obedient, and they are evil because they made the wrong call.
Yeah. Even doing evil is righteous if God told you to do it.
Oh, yeah.
You
And
still
if the
get the
king
whole
told you to do it. Henry V.
So then Dave H. says, Aaron, are you getting involved with Creaky about countering Matt Powell and his hatred of the LGBTQ community? No, to be quite frank, I don't pay a lot of attention to Matt Powell. And then there was another one from Miss Lud, said, is there any significance to suddenly calling God Adonai from the middle of the story?
I mean, it's the name that is given to the word to the tetrachronium, whatever this says. The Yud Hey Vav Hey.
Tetragrammaton?
Yeah, this is how you say it in you say Adonai instead of the word. So maybe because of this, I don't know.
I have seen at least one point in scholarship that says that a redactor starts partway through, which I mean, that may be a contested perspective, but it is a perspective. I'll mention it when we get there, because that's significant, but we should probably read more when we're done the comments.
All right, M. Doug for €5. No, excuse me, £5. Thank you. Says, I think it's odd that he would barter to save the lives of folks in Sodom, but not even give knifing his son a second thought.
Fair point.
good observation.
Fair
Yeah.
point.
And then Mislud for €6.66. Thanks for being my Sunday, Saturday entertainment system for the last 3 years. Thank you very much for that. And then Mac XTC for $5. Thank you. Says Trump the Messiah disapproves of this message. Okay. And then Silvio Juge Pantelimon says, why would an all-knowing God try people if he knows the results? Because he's a dick.
And also not all knowing. But
Yeah.
And I
that comes
also
later.
I have a commentary for this, but we'll get to this later.
Yeah, but the rest of the comment is that, but God isn't presented as perfect in the Bible. Wasn't this concept asserted later in Judeo-Christian theology?
Yeah.
Lawrence, you were about to
Yeah.
answer that.
Yeah. It was a later interpretation of that.
Yeah.
We start getting that a lot in wisdom literature, but not in these kinds of narratives.
No, these are far too early for that. Although I have heard, and this was one of the least ridiculous answers to the question that I was ever given by pastors, was that God doesn't need to know the results. We need to know the results. We need to go through and understand and see by experience this, that, and the next thing, which in certain circumstances I could actually see being a reasonable explanation of a trial or what have you, where you had to face it for yourself and figure out who you were and what you were going to do. Not in this case, though. This is fucked up.
Yeah.
But in life in general, sometimes parents do indeed, put you in a situation and say, you got to learn to handle this at an age appropriate time, hopefully.
Yeah. So just be obedient to your parents, because I'm your father and I already tossed your sisters out to a rape mob, and I threw your brother in the trash, and now I'm going to knife you because family values.
Oh my God, who thought that Casey Anthony was displaying biblical values?
Also, the concept of hell wasn't really fleshed out. It was basically just the grave, Sheol, right? It was just that's the most common interpretation, that it's basically just the grave. You're just dead. That's the land of the dead. It's underground. So it's not like, when we're talking about it seems like it was kind of a annihilationist, I think is the word for it, where if you are found to be righteous, then you will be in this new world, and this heavenly world, I guess, where everything is just fine and dandy all the time, and it's so it doesn't have that aspect to it, but perhaps there probably were sects that believed that you'd only be dead for so long before you come back or something as punishment, and that's a little harder to recover from what I've found, but that is a possible interpretation, in which case a trial would be nice to see your sentence right.
Are you saying it's a little bit hard to recover from death?
Hey, listen.
Sounds like a nap.
If you're
a nap to me.
If you're a god, you can do whatever the hell you want about it, right? So
Scientia Perceptum says, hello all, thanks for all your work, and gonna go for it for taking questions from the group. And then Rununder says, translations. I saw a rabbi disproving Christianity based on how Christians wrongly translated things in the Bible. I'm like, okay, fine. Now let's talk about your religion. And then Native Atheist for $20, thank you, says, thanks, Aaron. OU's gonna stomp Kansas Saint today. I don't know. I'm guessing if that's a sports reference. I don't do sports ball, so I have no idea.
We'll get you one of those sports t-shirts. You can go and cheer for the sports. Sports harder.
Very good.
Sports.
Yeah. Yeah, I've often said that I know so little about football that I can't even tell you who plays goalie for the Globetrotters. So Sean Alexander for $10, thank you, says, how did you last as long as you did dealing with the brain damage of Jesse Lee Peterson?
Oh,
Yeah, I didn't have any idea who that guy was when I got into there, and I always try to give the benefit of the doubt that I'm thinking that one of these believers is going to be sincere. They all want to say that they're just on a quest for the truth, but I very rarely meet one who is.
he might actually be, because this is a man so stupid that Ray Comfort gave him the, oh my God, is this person serious face that literally everybody else gives when they talk to Ray Comfort. So if you're so stupid that you give Ray Comfort the, oh dear Christ, am I being punked look, I think that's an achievement.
Okay. And then one more quote or one comment. Keshva says, if Isaac is suffering from health conditions, as is common in children born in late in life parents, would wanting to die being the adversary change the moral interpretation? Did I read that right?
I think he's ill, so put him down, sort of thing.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to continue reading because we've been
Wait.
Yes?
I haven't. We're just in verse 1, and I haven't finished my commentary for those verses, and we remain in this verse for 30 minutes.
Okay, go ahead, Tomer.
Okay, so verse 2, where it says, take your son. So I have another story from Bereshit Rabbah 55:7, which reads, Abraham said to God, I have 2 sons. He answered him, thine only son. It basically says, take your son, your only son. And Abraham said to God, but I have 2 sons. Then God said, take your only son. Abraham said, this one is the only son of his mother, and the other is the only son of his mother. God then said, the one whom you love the most. Abraham replied, I love both of them. Whereupon God said, just take Isaac. I just love this.
In fairness,
Okay.
it's Abraham being less of a dick than God. I'm not a high bar, but
yeah. Okay. So the region of Moriah. So according to several commentators like Rashi, Bachya ben Asher, and Baal HaTurim, who uses Gematria and fails, this is Jerusalem. And this is also supported by 2 Chronicles 3:1, which reads, then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. Chazal explained in Bereshit Rabbah 55:7, explained that the name is based on the Hebrew word for instruction, which is hora'ah, because from it, instruction came forth to Israel. Another explanation is that it derives from the word for mir, I think it's mir. Yeah, which in Hebrew is mor, which was part of the incense offering at the temple.
So I just want to add on to that that another possible reason for this would be it comes from he sees. So this this is transliterated as and I'm probably going to butcher this. Is this yira? I don't know.
Later on there is going to be a place called Adonai Yireh. Maybe you have referred to this.
So that's probably what I'm trying to say. But the reason is because they have similar syllables there, and it's I think what's the poetic term for it, like assonance or something. So that could be a reason to kind of tie in the beginning of the story to the end of it.
in a language where you don't write your vowels, it's very easy to mistake one word for another in writing. I mean, take any English sentence and write it with no spaces between the words and no vowels. And it'll take a good deal of inspiration to read it, twice as much inspiration as it took to write it. But that being said, there's.
But yeah, generally speaking, we don't actually know where this place is, even though you have this thing in 2 Chronicles. But 2 Chronicles gets a lot of things wrong, by the way. So even from its own source material, which
Deuteronomic
is
history.
Kings. Yeah, exactly. So like
Yeah.
it gets things wrong all the time. So I wouldn't say it'd be completely a trustworthy source there.
Okay.
But it does seem that the temple, the location for the temple, part of it was the mythology that it was built on this site. And what is the group now in Israel who practices the ancient Israelite practices that they're
Samaritans, I think.
the Samaritans? Yeah. Oh, I didn't
Yeah,
know
but they
were
believe that
called
this is from
Samaritans.
I think they believe that Mount Moriah is Mount Gerizim.
Yeah,
Oh,
they
yeah,
have a
Gerizim.
different mountain that they think is this mountain. So there's been like a great deal of religious fervor and wars, and probably lots of people killed over which mountain a schizophrenic madman decided to murder his kid on.
Yeah.
I wanted to go on verse 3, but first, Blue Color Red asks for me to go on camera. As I said previously, I'm shy, so deal with it. So yeah, verse 3. Something very interesting. Notice that throughout this chapter, this chapter doesn't really describe Abraham's emotions. It could be that his feelings don't matter here, or that the author wanted to show the stress in which Abraham is under. And notice that in this verse, the events are wrong. He should have chopped the wood first and then load them on the donkey. But here, he loads the donkey and then chops the wood. So it could show the state of confusion which Abraham is under.
I feel some stretching there, but
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
When you think the text is sacred, you'll find meaning in literally every word of it. So
Yeah.
I have one that says, if they ask about Isaac's age, which I don't know if you'll ask.
What
But are you interested?
Is there any canon on that?
I don't know if it's canon in the Bible, but there is estimates in generally in Jewish sources. For example, the Book of Jubilees 17 says that Isaac is 16 years old. Josephus in Antiquities of the Jews, Book 1, Chapter 13, writes that he was 26. Chazal in Bereshit Rabbah 55:4 wrote that he was 37, and Ibn Ezra writes that Isaac was close to 13. So the age is quite varied in several sources. So
it's almost like they're making it up as they go along.
Perhaps. I mean, at least Ibn Ezra tries to explain it logically. As what I've read.
That's something.
He concludes that he couldn't be 5 and 37, so he suggests maybe 13. And the last in this verse is 2 of his servants. So according to Chazal in Vaikra Rabbah 26:7, these are Ishmael and Eliezer.
Ishmael, who is already sent off.
Ishmael was already sent off to die in the. Fine, whatever.
Okay, now verse 4. On the third day, there is an Agadic story in Tanchuma Ve'era 22, which explains why it took Abraham 3 days to reach the mountain. In it, Satan created a river in their path. Again, when Abraham stepped into the river, it reached his knees. He ordered his young men to follow him, and they did so. But in the middle of the river, the water reached his neck. He then lifted his eyes to the heavens and prayed for God, and God rebuked the source of the water and caused the river to dry up. Yeah, I love those stories.
It
So
sounds
the guy's too stupid to know how to swim across a river, or too stupid not to get into a deep river. So God causes a drought to everybody downstream.
Yes.
And
it reminds me of the Muslim version of this that I was told by someone who was trying to convince me that this was anything other than a horrific story, which included Ishmael, obviously, instead of Isaac. But the whole thing was about Satan trying to convince Abraham not to murder his son, and Ishmael boldly saying, "No, you have to do what God tells you," and throwing rocks at the devil to keep him away. And then he actually murders his son, but God pulled a magical switcheroo, but shape-shifted, so it looked like he killed his son, and he actually killed a goat. Like the thing with the sacrifice of, was it Agamemnon's daughter in the Iliad when they're going to the Trojan War, where there's a myth that her body was replaced at the last moment with a doe by a goddess, and she was warped out of there and lived somewhere else.
Oh, yeah, actually.
Very similar to that.
I forget if it was Agamemnon's daughter, but yeah.
Agamemnon, yes. Sorry. Wrong.
Okay, so in verse 4, again, Abraham looked up and saw the place. So according to Bereshit Rabbah 56:1, Abraham saw a cloud attached to the mountain, so he knew where it was. Very convenient.
He didn't notice the mountain on its own.
I have also read that he saw a pillar of fire, but I don't know where the source of it was. So
Yeah,
So
they
are
stole
you
it
are
from
you
Moses'
possibly
story.
confusing that with the Exodus when they
no,
were
no,
following a
no,
column of smoke by day and a column of fire
no,
by
no, no,
night?
no,
They
no.
might have stolen that
I-
from the
I've-
Moses story. Like that's God's signature move, burning
Well, I mean,
cattle
it
with
struck
smoke tinder.
me. It struck me, and I did have one Bible scholar told me that I'm not on the right track with this. But I mean, it does seem that there are a whole bunch of places where the Bible does describe God as a volcano.
Yeah.
Yes, I would agree with the biblical scholar saying you're not on the right track. There are, of course, places where it seems like there are volcanic similarities, but if you're talking about a God who destroys a lot of things, yeah, you're just going to end up having some similarities.
I think it might be left over from the fact that the biblical God is a mashup. Like El is a sky god. You have lots of sky god elements, but Yahweh might indeed have been a mountain god based on, at least somewhat influenced by
Well,
some
what I mean by
volcanic
the
activity.
description is what I mean by the description is not just that it destroys things, although fire and brimstone raining down from the sky that's seemingly volcanic, right? Where there's lots of other references to the thunderous voice with the fire and the lightning and the smoke. And
Yeah, the
but then you
trembling
also
on the mountain, the pillar
exactly.
of fire and smoke.
but then
Yeah, I was
okay, sorry, go ahead,
reading.
Paul.
I think one of the comments said maybe Yahweh was a metalworking god, so that would usually metalworking gods like Vulcan or volcanoes live in
Oh, kind
volcanoes.
of a Hephaestus vibe. Well, he is
Yeah,
pretty
that's-
ugly, at least personally.
He didn't,
Yeah.
he didn't like iron, though.
I would say
He really didn't like iron chariots.
in terms of modern scholarship, it seems to be that Yahweh was a war and storm god, of course, taken over
Yeah.
from the Canaanite mythology, and not Yahweh himself, but his aspects like El. So war and storm god, and because well, you do have brimstone, fire and brimstone raining down. You also get the flood, right? And that doesn't sound like a volcano.
Oh, that sounds sky god, very
Yeah.
sky god.
Yeah, so it's not. It doesn't really hold up, I don't think.
In
Yeah.
the Exodus, they followed a pillar of smoke, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
a
too.
pillar of
Well,
smoke that
I
also
think-
looked like fire in the night. So it
Yeah.
like that's something that specifically would be very volcano, something that looked like smoke in day and fire at night.
Yeah,
But
in order
like,
to test
I
the
still
hypothesis,
think
we
it-
have to try to disprove it. So
I still think
Yeah.
it's like it might have something to do with it. This god is a mashup. It was not
Yeah.
a single coherent god that came full formed. It picks up stuff. It's frankly like rolling gum across the floor. It picks up a bit here and a bit there. So yeah, it might have picked up something from a volcano god aspect somewhere along the way. Doesn't mean
And
it.
it's usually in Exodus that the volcano resemblance is in Exodus, but in Genesis there's none of that.
No.
If you go back to the flood story, if you think the earlier versions of the myths, you had one god who wanted to destroy people, one god who wanted to save them, and God is basically playing both those roles because he has to take on the aspects of the other gods because he's playing all of those roles in the Bible's
Which is a bit
version.
like the Trimurti. I mean, and kind of the Trinity too, when you have the destroyer, the creator, and the destroyer, and the preserver.
Yeah.
Okay, so Matt White
Okay.
says translation of scripture from Latin into languages that people actually speak was resisted because that would lead to folk creating their own interpretation.
It did.
Okay. And then last level for $5, thank you, says, thank you, R and Raw, for helping me, a baby atheist, with my new journey. Love what you do and your work. I wish I can meet you in person to hug you. Thank you very
Aw.
much, last level. And then M. Doug for £2 says, uncut logs need less bundling on the donkey, maybe. But it was a while back, so since that was related to what we were talking about, I think, and I've lost the connection. So Scientia perceptomy. Okay, sun just My son, okay, that's what it was. It's two words blended together. Sorry. My son just came into the room and mentioned that the video game he's playing right now, The Binding of Isaac, is based on this mythology. All right, so it's a video game now. And then Sean Alexander for $10, thank you, says November is around the corner, so remember to vote the same way you drive. D moves you forward and R sends you in reverse. That is true. Sean Alexander says for $10, thank you very much. Oh, wait, that's the same one. I just read it put up there twice. Okay. All right, now.
Wait, I haven't finished with verse 5.
I don't think you're going to get to be able to read all 6 pages of commentary.
I can. Just
all right.
let me do this thing.
Run away with it.
Okay, so the verse that says stay here. Rabbi Obadiah Sfono comments that he orders them to not follow him so that they will not interfere with what he's about to do. Fair enough. And he will come back to you. Rashi comments that Abraham prophesied that they will both return. However, Bachya ben Asher writes that Abraham intended to bring back Isaac's bones. Okay, that's it.
That's
bring back Isaac's bones.
Yes.
His torch.
What are you supposed to do?
Stab and burn his son and bring back a pile of bones to his mother.
I don't know what happened. He was like this when I found him.
Yeah. Okay, so finally we can read through verse 6 and 10.
Okay. Who wants to take over? Anybody?
I suppose. What?
Okay, Lorence.
I can do it. So from verse 6, right? Okay.
Yes.
And this is what Tomer was referencing with the wood here. And Abraham took the wood for the offering and put it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the cleaver, and the two of them went together. And Isaac said to Abraham his father, "Father," and he said, "Here I am, son." And he said, "Here is the fire and the wood, but where is the sheep for the offering?" And Abraham said, "God will see to the sheep for the offering, my son." And the two of them.
He didn't want to have to chase him,
Yeah,
Before he put him on there. Oh, we'll have a sheep, you'll see.
And why are my hands tied behind my back, Dad?
Oh, no reason, son. And the two of them went together, and they came to the place that God had said to him. And Abraham built there an altar and laid out the wood and bound Isaac his son and placed him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham reached out his hand and took the cleaver to slaughter his son. Now, I do want to point out that the terminology here used has been pointed out by Spicer, that this is not really, it doesn't have sacrificial connotations to it. Like, it's not even the same knife that's used for sacrifices. It would be a different word for knife, and it suggests butchering. Also, of course, I just said the verb to slaughter, and of course binding. These are all suggesting of a butchering rather than a sacrifice proper.
I want to comment.
He's going to eat his son. Because when I mentioned earlier that there's a point where at least some scholars believe a redactor interjected and changed the ending, this is that line. He reaches for the knife, switch editors. Now, again, this may not actually be the case, but if it is the case, then that means there was a different ending to this tale. And considering what the ending is that we all know and hate, it was probably a much worse ending, because it just, I stand with Hitchens, and this is something I knew I was going to bring up today, because Lalandra, I don't know if you ever had the courage to ask your father if he would sacrifice you if God asked him to. I never had the courage to ask my father that question.
No, but maybe he would. He wasn't a cruel man, but he just was a very literal man.
At 8, I thought it would have been, even at 6, I think, I thought it would have been that I should want him to say yes, and I didn't. So I didn't dare ask him, because I also didn't want to know. But like that, the number of stories of ex-evangelicals who are talking about how, like, at 6 years old, because this is when they tell you this story for the first time, 6, 7, maybe, they asked their parents, would you be willing to sacrifice? And the best answer was usually God would never ask me to do that, despite the fact that God clearly did. So that's not answering the question. Usually, a lot of people would say, if I was certain it was God, then yes. And
Yeah,
this is one of the things I mean about the absolute evil of this story and the evil it has perpetuated and the cruelty.
Yeah.
Because I stand with Christopher Hitchens. If God told me to take my child and cut their throat to prove myself to him, I'd say no. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Not a
so I want to
godly
start my
motivation.
commentary.
I do actually. Sorry, Tomer.
No, you carry on.
Yeah, but before you hop into the commentary here, I am currently looking through Van Setter's work on this, and he points out that Mariah would be this. He gives a different answer from the stuff that we already covered. That he would translate it as Moraya, so that's land of the fear of Yahweh, fear of Yah, but Yah was just short for Yahweh.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably also a pretty good answer because Van Setters is kind of a genius. So I think that might add something to the story then.
I was going to add to what Lilith said. Richard Elliott Friedman is a proponent of the documentary hypothesis, and he says this chapter is from E, but he says that he believes that it's possible that in the original version he actually went through with the sacrifice, and he said like the deity's name switches from Elohim to Yahweh. At the end, he says, because you have done this, fallen, because you were willing to do this. At the end, only Abraham comes down the mountain. And also there's apparently Midrashic sources that say that Isaac actually was sacrificed.
Some people have said that Abraham believed that God would raise him from the dead after he killed him. That was his act of faith.
After he traumatized him.
Oh, yeah, no, the thing, Abraham believed he was actually going to have to kill the kid and then God would magically resurrect him.
I know, but like he would bring him back to life after he violently killed him.
Super
What we're seeing
traumatized
here,
for the rest of his life at this point. In any
what
version.
we're seeing here is the reality of the authors of the original story telling this dark tale that they think you need to prove your faith prove your faith, but it's not enough that you carve into the most sensitive part of your body to prove what a gullible believer you are. You also have to prove your conviction by killing the thing most precious to you. Right. So this is what they're going for. But then you come into the situation just like the oldest version of the story is kind of horrific, but you realize you're telling this story to kids. So let's soften this up a bit so that after the wolf eats Grandma and Red, then the woodsman comes in and just cuts open the wolf and Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood come out of the wolf alive.
Yeah.
You said earlier that you don't understand people who read the Bible and think that Jesus is Yahweh. And I'd like to say, while I see that point of view, I'd like to remind you that anyone who does not hate his father or mother, his brother or sister or friend, for my sake, cannot be my disciple.
Matthew 10.
Yeah.
Might have a little more in common than you thought.
Can I please start my commentary right now?
No. Yes,
okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay,
it's feeling that Tomo wants to speak.
Okay, it's not here on my notes, but because Lorence mentioned it, the word that is used for the knife is me'achelet, which isn't really a word that is used for knife, but if you could read it literally, it means a feeder, because it has the root achal, which means to eat, so it's like an eater. Yeah, an eater will be much more correct.
So is it like a knife?
That's fucked up.
A knife eaten? Is that what the interpretation?
Well, he's supposed to bring the bones back.
Well, the thing is that would happen a lot in biblical traditions, right? And even in Greek cultures as well, I think, where they would actually, hold on, yeah, in the Bible specifically, like they talk about the mouth of the sword or something like that, because it is the thing that will eat you. That's the thing that's going to get you. So
it devours souls. Or what have you.
Also, Aaron, I wanted to mention that the interpretation that he brings back Isaac's bones is from one commentator. I've talked about Rashi, who comments that he prophesies that they will both return. So
Gotcha.
Okay, so now verse 7, which says, Isaac spoke up and said to his father. So I have a story here from Bereshit Rabbah 56:4, which has the angel Samael. Funny.
Yay!
Yeah, so
Yay,
which is the name of
Lucifer.
for the audience. That's the name of one of my snakes.
Aw.
So the angel Samael tried to convince Abraham to disobey God, and quote, Samael went to our father Abraham and said, old man, have you lost your mind? You are going to slay a son given to you at the age of 100. And Abraham replied, even this I do. Samael said, and if he sets you an even greater test, can you stand it? He replies, even more than this. Samael said, tomorrow he will say to you, you are guilty of murder. You murdered your son. He replied, still I go. Seeing that he could achieve nothing with him, he approached Isaac and said, son of an unhappy mother, he is going to slay you. He replied, still I go. Samael said, if so, all these fine tunics which your mother made be a legacy for Ishmael, the hated of her house, and you don't care. If a word is not completely effective, it may yet be effective in part. That's what is written. And Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, my father. So there.
See,
Okay.
Satan is the only good guy. Satan is the
Samael.
only good guy in this story.
It's Samael.
Somehow.
Yeah, well, there's some crossover. in it.
Okay, so
They're close. Yeah, they're close enough. Yeah.
I thought it was Sam I Am from Dr. Zeus.
okay, now
I
verse
don't
8.
think, yeah.
Wait, did you say Dr. Zeus? Because I like that
I
more for
did.
this.
Sam,
I
I
think
am.
it's pronounced-
I am
I
Sam.
think it's pronounced Zeus.
Zeus.
Yes.
It's actually in reality Zeus, but it's not. It's irrelevant. Okay, so
Okay,
verse
I was
8.
talking about an orangutan anyway.
Zeus. In Greek, it's Zeus.
Okay, verse 8. So according to Rashi, Isaac knew that he was going to be sacrificed, but nonetheless he walked with him. It is written in Tanchuma Vayera 23. Immediately an overpowering fear and violent trembling seized Isaac, for when he saw nothing to be sacrificed, he realized what was about to transpire. Yet he asked once again, where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham responded, since you asked, the Holy One, blessed be he, selected you. If he has chosen me, Isaac replied, I shall willingly surrender my soul to him, but I am gravely concerned about my mother. I love those stories.
This is so disturbing. This is a celebration of being unreasonable.
Yeah, and like God really is sticking it to him here because he made him wait till he was 100 to have this child to test his faith, and then now let me burn you some more
And we have
make you sacrifice this child.
we
you
have
waited
at
so
least
for.
3 major religions based on this story.
Yes.
Based on glorifying this story, which is fucking horrifying.
Yeah.
And I think the moral of the story is that God always breaks his promise and only keeps it technically in the most horrifying way possible and totally fucks you over every time.
I also want to. I've said this before, but the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard has based his philosophy. I think he wrote a book about the binding of Isaac, but it's not relevant. Okay, so verse 9, where it says he bound his son Isaac. So according to Tanchuma Vayera 23, Isaac was the one who suggested to be bound, and it
What?
reads, yeah.
So he
Isaac
didn't
was-
Why did you tie me
away.
up?
Wait
Dad.
a minute. It reads.
Whoa,
as
you said it was his dad, not his daddy.
Okay, it reads, as Abraham was about to slaughter him, Isaac cried out, Father, bind my hands and feet, for the will to live is strong within me. And when I see the knife descending, I may tremble, and the offering may become defective as a result of the knife slipping. I implore you not to make me a blemished offering.
Tie me up or I'll run away.
And
Yeah, because
so
as an offering, you can't be blemished, right? So he's got a point there, I guess.
I would have blemished all over myself at this point.
Isaac should have pulled a reverse Uno and offered Abraham as a sacrifice.
Mm.
I love the concept. I've just blemished all over myself. Okay, please continue.
That's it for my 5 to 10. So
Okay, all right. Who's reading?
I can continue.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Where was I? Yeah. So, and the Lord's. Wait, hold on.
Verse
Yeah.
11
So,
to 15.
and Abraham reached out his hand and took the cleaver to slaughter his son. And the Lord's messenger called out to him from the heavens and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not reach out your hand against the lad, and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, and you have not held back your son, your only one, from me. And this is kind of the stuff that gets me thinking that angels in general were just kind of extensions of God, stuff like this.
Yeah.
And Abraham raised his eyes and saw, and look, a ram was caught on the thicket by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up as a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place, and I'm gonna butcher this, Yahweh Yireh. Is that close?
Congratulations.
Thank
It's
you.
close enough.
Although,
That's what I
although
was.
the name,
I was
although the
gonna-
name, I'm going to butcher this, actually would suit well.
Yeah,
Okay.
as
So the angel shows
as
up.
is said to this day.
The Lord
Uh,
will provide is the translation, as I understand.
Yeah.
On the mount of the Lord there is sight.
So the
And
God who
that comes
supposedly
from
knows
the name.
everything sent Abraham to do this horrible quest, this terrible thing, and then chuckles and says, "Hey, just kidding, J.K.
Yeah.
Psych."
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a
You know-
great joke. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. God, you're quite the chuckster.
Um,
Yeah.
Abraham's pissing himself laughing, and Isaac is like shivering nervously.
Pissing himself.
Probably.
Just straight pissing himself.
And just imagine what Abraham's idea of his father is from here on.
Isaac's,
sh-
Abraham, yeah.
Oh,
can
yeah,
I start
sorry.
my commentary for
Wait-
11
wait
to
a
15,
second.
or do you
Just
want
ask
to?
permission, just do it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with 11, where it says the angel of the Lord. So, using gematria, Baal Haturim suggested that this angel was Michael, but his gematria is wrong.
Yeah, Gematria is usually wrong.
Yeah. So, okay, so verse 12. Now I know that you fear God. So Maimonides writes about this verse. From this action for which you deserve to be truly called a God-fearing man, all people shall shall learn how far we must go in the fear of God. So, why is it written that God now knows that Abraham believes in him if God is omniscient? So, first explanation that I've read is that, again, the Torah spoke in human tongues. He knew that Abraham believed in him, but the Torah describes his actions and thought like how humans behave. That's one explanation. And the second explanation.
That's a weird way of human behavior.
Yeah. And the second explanation is that God knew that Abraham believes in him, but the freedom of choice is given, and God doesn't know what man will do until he performs the action. As Chazal said in Mishnah Avot 3:15, this is a general quote: "Everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is granted." This is like a common saying in Hebrew.
Then everything is not foreseen.
Yeah.
If God doesn't know what we're going to do, then I mean, how many billions of interactions are there? But for any years down the road kind of prophecy where everything can change, and God
Mhm.
supposedly doesn't know what we're going to do. Then if he doesn't know what we're going to do, then we have free will, but prophecy doesn't exist. If he knows what we're going to do, we don't have free will, and prophecy can exist.
It's a direct contradiction. There's so many in theology, and I've made the point before in conversation with the aspect of the Trinity that the evolved purpose of a theology may not be the same as the reason it was originally put in. These things were originally put in because the Bible can't be wrong, so that they would just affirm both sides of a direct contradiction and say that it was a mystery in faith. And the reason that those concepts have stayed, and the reason that they have become fundamental and necessary unto salvation and a core part of Christianity, at least, is because if you put a foundational belief, a direct contradiction as a foundational belief, you set faith above reason. You violate the very first logical principle, the law of non-contradiction, that a thing cannot be both A and not A. You violate that immediately. and you put a belief based in unreason at the very core of your identity in a place where you cannot question it, or you suffer a fate worse than death.
I wanted to comment on what you said at A and not A, but it's irrelevant. So, verse 13 right now, where it talks about the ram. So interestingly, in the Hebrew Bible, it reads Ail Achar as described in the ram, but this doesn't mean anything in Hebrew. So some commentators described as the ram being behind me'achor Abraham, or appearing after acharei it had been caught. Or it could be a copying error, as the letters Dalet and Resh look the same. So the word would have been echad, which will mean one. So it could mean one ram.
Yeah, that's probably the likely interpretation there. Yeah.
And about verse 14, about the Lord will provide, more accurately will be the Lord has chosen, i.e., this is the place where God has chosen an offering that is not Isaac.
So
And I
the
think
thing is that Abraham finds this animal who's gotten itself trapped by its horn in the bushes, and rather than free the suffering beast, he slaughters what is not even his and calls it a sacrifice. How is it a sacrifice? You just killed a trapped animal. And it's not even yours.
That's about
It's
it.
still better than murdering his kid.
He killed an animal. That was it. That was the sacrifice.
Yeah, and he hasn't even untied Isaac yet either. It doesn't say he goes straight to Isaac and goes, "Oh, thank God for that, I'm going to untie you." Like, no, I can kill this now.
Okay, Tomer, you got any more?
No.
Okay. All right, Lawrence?
All right, continuing on here after the etiology here. And the Lord's messenger called out to Abraham once again from the heavens, and he said, "By my own self I swear, declares the Lord, that because you have done this thing and have not held back your son, your only one, I will greatly bless you, and will greatly multiply your seed as the stars in heaven and as the sand on the shore of the sea, and your seed shall take hold of its enemies' gates, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through your seed, because you have listened to my voice." And Abraham returned to his lads, and they rose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelled in Beersheba.
On the verse 14, it says Abraham named the place Jehovah Jireh. We used to sing a song in Southern Baptist Church. I don't remember the tune. It went Jehovah Jireh.
Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me.
Your
Yes.
transliteration is awful.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
you know,
What do you expect of an evangelical song? Come on,
Yeah.
I'm just going with the song. I'm not. There's no scholarship in it. This is something we would sing as children and clap to.
yes.
Yeah, happy
Okay.
Wow.
I like that Homer's objection to that was about the transliteration, not the sound in our ears.
I do object to this as well, but the transliteration had bothered me so much. Okay, so my commentary
Before
for the
you,
yes.
I'm sorry. You've got commentary. Go ahead.
No, Aaron, you are the king. Go ahead.
There is no king. All right, just wanted to get
Let us all bow to Aaron, please. Everybody
Yeah,
together.
fuck it. So Bratitude said, is there still the concept of two gods? I'm thinking the Canaanite El Shaddai and Yahweh being condensed into one, as discussed previously.
I think there is. I remember that there is that that Yahweh was original God for different areas. So there was a Yehovah Teman, Yehovah Shomron, but I don't really know much about this. So
If you're
just
asking
saying.
about the documentary hypothesis and what part of this is thought to be what, the first part of the story and the last part of the story seem to use the term El and are presumed to have been written by the Elohist source, meaning Israelite, coming from Israelite sources, the northern kingdom. However, this is the part where at least some scholars believe a redactor, but a redactor using the name of Yahweh came in and inserted the bit about Isaac being saved at the last minute, which makes it all okay. But the fact that they used Yahweh specifically would be indicative of a later edition, a much later edition, when they were trying to marry these concepts.
There's something
So
I don't have straight on the names. He called this place Jehovah Jireh, so that's the JH the
that's
JVH
Yahweh.
name.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's Yahweh, and that part is thought to be by the redactor, at least in this model, and
Yeah.
that's the Yahweh bit. It goes from the psych, don't put the knife down, to the bit about the naming the mountain. That's the part that
Yeah.
is from presumably, possibly from a redactor who was using the other name of God. So you do see, vestiges of the mashup, definitely. But again, the whole point of the mashup is that there was never a mashup. We were always at war with Eurasia. We were always allies with East Asia. There was never a mashup. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Was
was gonna
Yahweh
say-
and Jehovah two different pronunciations of the same name?
Yes,
Yeah.
Jehovah's
Yeah.
Jehovah's a bad transliteration. Basically, they were. I've heard different theories about it, but it's like in Latin you've got like J wasn't actually a separate letter; it was actually I, and you also had V was pronounced more like W. So it's been translated to Latin and then kind of butchered in English and everything.
Yeah, yeah. So I would say on whether or not the you get the whole two gods thing. So the way it would have been was, yeah, as Tomer mentioned, Yahweh would have initially been worshipped somewhere else and kind of brought into the land later. And then as time went on, they started picking up features of the gods of Canaan. So that would include, of course, El and then Baal as well.
Yeah.
So eventually, the Yahweh, while yes, Tomer also mentioned that he was worshipped locally in a whole bunch of places, the name Yahweh more generally would have become it would have been that mashup, right, that you mentioned. It would have gained all those aspects of a whole bunch of high gods. So at this point in time, while the author is writing this, it probably would have just been, of course, the one god that had already gained many of those aspects that we discussed earlier. So
they seem to have taken sacred writings about El from the Israelites and like woven them in to, but mashed up the names a lot. I'm assuming because at least some of this was familiar to the people, and you don't take away the things that people are familiar with when you want to fix your religion.
We have a Christian in the comments who was saying that if you want to just keep making fun of this, and for your own pleasure, you can. But if you want to see the beauty behind of this, then at least give it a fair shot. So the person in the comments does not seem to realize that most of us are former believers.
Yep.
If you think
So
there's any beauty in being willing to murder your child for God, then you are a sick, evil fuck, and I hope you have no kids.
Yeah. People
Yeah.
do
So,
And
I
I'd
mean,
like
yeah,
to point out, as a Christian, for years, every time I was uncomfortable with this story, the response was always, but he didn't really do it. Because God pulled the psych card right at the last second. You
No,
don't
what about
have to.
what about
as
the
if
guy who
that makes
murdered
it
his
okay.
daughter? What about the guy who comes back victorious from battle? Says he's going to kill the first thing that comes
Jephthah.
out of his house.
Jephthah. Well, and
Right,
this is where
but he killed her, right?
He did. But this is where Christianity is worse than Judaism, because as I understand it, and I grant I'm not the ultimate authority on this by any means, as I understand it, the story of Jephthah is considered something of a cautionary tale amongst Jews, where it's like, this is fucked up and he shouldn't have done that. This is an example of there was no king in Israel in those days and everyone did what he thought best and it was really bad. Whereas Christians will and have absolutely defended Jephthah as an icon of faith and virtue. And it's incredibly fucking evil. And especially growing up as a girl, and you read that in the Bible, and you're like, what the hell? This is the good guy?
Tomer was saying that some of the sages say that these old stories are just like the stories of savages, and it's not God's fault that they're awful.
Really, the stories of savages. Just no matter who wrote them, if somebody thinks it's a good idea to sacrifice kids, or
because
actually the
voice in your
Bible
head-
talks against it, so I don't.
Yeah, the voice in your head told you to do this. And so throughout the Bible, you've got the stories of like Job, for example, where God is just torturing Job just to prove how unreasonable Job is, because that's a virtue, that you believe impossible nonsense for no good reason and you refuse to be reasoned with. That's what the Bible is celebrating.
Should I start my commentary, or do you want to finish the?
Don't ask permission. Just do it.
I actually do want
I'm
to make.
sorry.
Sorry,
Ever since people shouted at me because I was rude at Genesis 16:17, I'm trying to be careful. I really don't want to be rude or.
Well, let Lorence say something that. and then take over.
Yeah, I understand where Tomer's coming from with that. So the one note I had for the Christian in the comments, apparently. So I do my own Bible show, and we like half of our chat is actually Christian, which is really funny to me, and they enjoy the shows. So the point of these types of shows, and I don't know, maybe this is the reason Aaron has me on here, but I don't really like. Sometimes, yeah, it can be fun to make fun of it, but in the same way that it's fun to make fun of anything, really. But my greater overall purpose is to understand these texts in their context. I want to understand the minds of the authors, the minds of the readers, the textual traditions. I want to understand that stuff, and the best way to do it, well, first of all, is just to read it, and secondly is to supplement it with commentary and scholarship on these issues. So you might be able, like, I can understand from your point of view why you would see this as we're just making fun of it, but we are really trying to understand these texts, because that is important. Their historical context will only add to their understanding. So these are important discussions.
If you don't understand something at all, you can still make fun of it. That's easy. Everybody does. I mean, you on all throughout social media, you see people making fun of shit they don't understand at all. But where's the value in that? So I, like you, Lorence, I want to make sure that the understanding is justified, that the ridicule is justified.
Yeah.
When I was a Christian and I was studying an Arabic class, the Arabic teachers, they said there's a story of this man who's praised because he was rich, but he didn't have any food for guests, and that's a big no-no. So he slayed his finest Arabic stallions to feed to them, and this is praiseworthy. And as a Christian, I said, "Oh, that sounds kind of like why keep telling this story? This story sounds kind of silly." And maybe if this Christian was listening, doesn't that kind of sound like something silly to celebrate to you too? So then, but at the time, I didn't make the connection that this story of Abraham sacrificing or going to sacrifice his son to prove his faith in God is maybe more ridiculous.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, my approach to the Bible, because I actually do Bible satire, and it's not a case of saying, look, let's take the total piss out of this. Part of the reason I do what I do is so that people actually look at the stories. I said, like, look at the story and see if you can figure out which part of the absurdity comes from me and which part's in the original text. I think humor sometimes helps to make it more palatable. And if we weren't laughing and joking, this would be a pretty fucking miserable stream talking about somebody being sacrificed just to prove a point to God.
The fact of how horrific it really is, we have to laugh at it because it's horror.
It is.
Can I start my commentary now?
Stop asking permission.
Okay, I think it means that I should start my commentary. Okay,
Yes.
so verse 17, which says, "I will surely bless you." So Nachmanides comments, because we've seen how much God blesses him, so he gives a justification for why he says it now. It says, "In the beginning, he promised him that he would increase his descendants as the stars of heaven and the dust of the earth. But now he gave him the additional assurance that because thou hast done this great deed, he swore by his great name that he would increase his descendants and that his seed will possess the gate of its enemies. Thus, Abraham was assured that no sin whatever would cause the destruction of his descendants, nor would they fall into the hand of their enemies and not rise again. Thus, this constitutes a perfect divine assurance of the redemption which is destined to come to us."
So I just want to be clear on this. God is promising the Jewish people
Hmm.
that they will never be subjugated by their oppressors.
Oh, they'll never be
Hmm.
completely removed. That's the whole big thing. Now, of course, we get another instance of that in the dynastic promise once we get to the David story, that there will always be a king of the Davidic line in Israel. Now, of course, that turned out to be completely wrong. And so, but you could see this as like, now, of course, they did, they did have
Does
a
God
lot of
ever not lie? Is God like Trump? Just everything he says is always a lie to the point where you wouldn't believe him if he said the grass was green?
And
I don't know, maybe it's 50-50.
I
I
have
feel
a
like
comment.
also this is like one of those histories written by the victors type thing where they're praising themselves through Abraham. See, our ancestor was this righteous, and this is why we are so successful. And people develop a kind of a self righteousness about their own civilization, their own culture, because of this, where you can't criticize it because it's from God, and it's the promise of God, and look what Abraham had to do to be this great forefather.
Of all the things to be proud of.
Okay, so now for verse 19, which says, "Then Abraham returned to his servants." But what about Isaac? Why isn't he
Yeah.
mentioned? So
Yeah.
Ibn Ezra comments that Isaac was under Abraham's care, so he's also included in there. And Bereshit Rabbah 56:11 reads, Rabbi Berachia said in the name of the rabbis from there, he sent him to Shem to study Torah. This is similar to a woman who became wealthy through her spindle. She said, "Since I have become wealthy through this spindle, it will never leave my hand." So to Abraham said, "All that has happened to me is only because I engaged in Torah and mitzvot, so I do not want it to ever depart from my seed."
He sent him to study the Torah that hasn't been written yet.
Yes.
We get kind of the same thing in the Quran, which I think is fascinating. The very first chapter of the Quran right away says that you are commanded to believe the Quran. It hasn't been written yet.
I can imagine
the first chapter.
I can imagine Isaac saying, "I'm going to go off and live with somebody else," and then Abraham turns around afterwards and says, "Oh yeah, that was my idea. I said he needs to study more."
It's also written after the fact when we talk about how these the seed will spread and become great and everything. They already know in that culture that they're dominant in that area. This is all written in the Levant area, so where they dominate. So yeah, that they're just backtracking. It's not a great prophecy if it's written after the fact and retrofitted to it.
Yeah, it's called if anyone wants to know the technical term for this, it's ex eventu prophecy.
Thank you.
So it's the actual
I've also read from this same verse in Bereshit Rabbah that he sent him by night because of the evil eye, because he wanted to prevent him from evil eye. I don't have it written here, but yeah.
The evil eye.
Yeah.
Does it
Something
sit
like
on top of a tower?
I didn't hear it.
Does the evil eye sit on top of a tower?
I don't. Oh, yeah. I am not familiar with Lord of the Rings stuff. So
Quick, we must throw the Bible into the fires of Mount Doom.
Destroy it.
I can imagine that Isaac would be given him more than the bloody evil eye. You took us up this mountain to kill me. It's like you're going to get, yeah.
We got some more chats stacking up, so I'm going to try to get through them. So Miss Lutz says, if you could read verse 8 like Abraham replied, God will provide himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. Yeah, I like the way that was implied. It's the lamb is my son. And then Native Atheist says, has Aaron Ra ever met Hitchens? Real quick, I stood next to the man, and he was talking to this little girl, giving her like a list of books to read, which I thought was fascinating because this 8-year-old girl was talking to Hitchens about what books should I read, and he gives her a list, right? And it was like a list of 5 different books that she should read, and she goes, I've already read all of those. I'm like, I'm gonna want to interview that girl when she grows up, because she's going to be amazing. But then Hitchens turned from her and looked to me, and I put out my hand to say hello, to introduce myself. And Dawkins was standing on the other side of me. And that was the moment that Dawkins swept Hitchens up to the hospital. So, yeah, we looked at each other, but never actually had a chance to speak. And that was the last time that Hitchens was ever seen in public. So I was that close.
If anyone who ever knows Hitchens ever sees this, there is one question I've always wanted to know the answer to, which is, what was Christopher Hitchens' favorite poem by John Donne? Because he and I have the same favorite religious poet, and I have always wanted to know which one he loved best. And if it was one of the sacred ones, or if it was something like To His Mistress on Going to Bed.
Okay, and the next one, Miss Luda again says, don't forget that Abraham argued with God about the number of righteous men in Sodom.
Yeah.
So he obviously doesn't think his son is righteous. Well,
but his son wasn't in Sodom, so I don't understand this.
No, it means he bargained for strangers, but not for his own kid.
But his kid wasn't born yet.
No, like
but you know,
before he sacrificed. It's like,
the
God,
kid
are you
did
sure?
questionable things when he was alone at 13. So
okay, never mind.
Isaac had been a brat that day. It's like, yeah, I'll fucking sacrifice him.
Whatever.
Afrophysicist, say this again correctly, Afrophysicist 314, I love this name, for $10. Thank you. Says, this story with Abraham and his son made me not see God as good. Good. Yeah, I get that. There's nothing good about this story, and it's the one that I see Christians defending the most. You're correct. There is nothing good about this story. So Phobos, moving on to the next comment, Phobos says, why is God-fearing a virtue? Why would any God need fear? Wouldn't kindness be far more preferable? But I guess gotta rule through fear. Yeah, if you don't possess reason or wisdom, you have to use fear.
So I just want to point out that within theology, fear of the Lord is understood kind of differently, like more like the shock and awe aspect kind of thing. So it's not like, fear of your life, but like it is. I mean, it's still fear. Yeah, like, but it's a little different than like, when we say like we're scared of something.
It's like the way you'd fear a king back in the day when a king could have you boiled in oil or put on a spike if you pissed them off. They wouldn't necessarily do that just going about unless they were Joffrey, but but they could. The point is they could. So you were polite at the very least.
Yeah, I gotta say, I really appreciate the team that has assembled themselves here for this project. I mean, I asked Lorence. I specifically asked Lorence because I just needed him. But all these other people that came in, y'all are stellar. I'm really glad that you guys have put yourselves together in this assemblage. Tomer, you've been doing a great job. So
on God and
I'm
fear. Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge."
Yeah, and I'm going to contest that entirely.
And the scripture of Lilith says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of bullshit."
Ra's law of traffic is that the vehicle in my lane ahead of me is always going too slow.
I'm sorry if I'm a bit rude here, but I believe we should first start with reading verse 20 and 24 and then read the comments because we have like 30 minutes left.
Yes.
If it's not very rude, thank you. So because it contains Hebrew words, shall I read it?
Go ahead.
Yes, you
Yeah,
shall.
thank you very much. So verse 20. Sometime later, Abraham was told, Milcah is also a mother. She has borne sons to your brother Nahor. Uts, the firstborn, Buz, his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, and Kesed, Chazor, Pildash, Yudlaf, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rivkah. Milcah bore these 8 sons to Abraham's brother Nahor. His concubine, whose name was Reumah, also had sons, Tevach, Gacham, Tachash, Ma'acha.
I'm so glad you read this, because if I had said Milka, Uz and Buzz, Kemuel, Aram, Kesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jildath, Bethnal.
So
Milka's a
I have
terrible name for a woman. It's a name you'd give to a cow. That's a Milka, that one.
so I have 2 comments here. The first is about verse 20, sometime later. There is another story from Bereshit Rabbah 57:3, described as described by Rashi. After these words express the thoughts of Abraham after the binding. Quote, when he returned from Mount Moriah, Abraham was pondering, and he said, if my son only had really been slain, he would have died without children. I must marry him to one of the daughters of Aner or Eshkol or Mamre. The Holy One, blessed be he, therefore had the announcement made to him that Rebekah, the one fit to be Isaac's consort, had been born.
So it's the father's responsibility to mate his child with somebody else's child, like an assortment, like we're livestock breeders.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a business transaction.
We forget how primitive culture was at this point. And there's, I'm going to almost sound a little bit like I'm defending it, I think it was a necessary step in our evolution. When you have these very tribal people in a very brutal time, you have to stick together or you die, which led to a great deal of tribalism, which then led to more violence, which is bullshit, but I understand how it happened. You had to have multiple wives and many children because, one, infant mortality was high, as was death in childbirth, but also you needed the clan to stick together and you needed enough people to get everything done. And, maybe you would buy slaves as well, but people also instinctively or not wanted to have their own progeny and continue their name. I don't think they had a concept of immortality at this point. You lived on through your children. You made more of you into the future, and you did as much of that as you could because life was short and brutal. And so, yeah, you were trying to find a good woman of good stock for your kids because she was going to come in and then be part of your family and hopefully have kids and carry on the family line. I can understand why that was so important to people when that was their entire support system, when that was all they had. When you get into cities, you have more networked support and you're still going to have kids, but it's not quite the same level of, it becomes more complex. Yeah,
I
it's
understand
very
that.
Is that your parrot?
primitive.
Yeah,
Is that
that
your
is
parrot?
my parrot. That is my parrot demanding attention, and I would bring him on camera, but he's green.
The invisible parrot.
So this is my final comment. My final comment for this chapter about verse 23, which says Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. So Rashi comments that this entire genealogical record is given only for the sake of this verse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, we see this throughout, and we're going to keep seeing it for a while. How they, thank you, Parrot. How they take already probably existing genealogical lists and kind of weave them into the story to make it all link up.
Yeah, whether it
Yeah.
follows on or not, really.
Well, in a
believe
largely pre-literate society, you would keep a memory list of your ancestors.
Yeah.
Probably far more effective than we could, but still,
I
somewhat
believe
valuable.
Lilith said that I wouldn't finish this.
Sorry,
I proved you wrong, didn't I?
I
Yeah,
said
so I'm a
you
little
were right.
confused. I'm a little confused about the Bible because I mean it does seem it contradicts itself a lot from what I can see, and I'm a little confused at some of these people don't have their first kid until they're 50. But when you look at the rest of the context of the Bible, I have to wonder what did they eat before?
You gotta. It's honestly, it's a bit like comic books, Aaron. Seriously. In comic books, you have the same characters that keep going through multiple different stories. And DC solved this with and Marvel as well, with having like a multiverse concept, alternate universe timelines, blah 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 blah, whatever. Religion doesn't do that because it can't, so they just go mash it all together and there's no contradiction. Because
Well, it's maybe like you have the James Bond, Doctor Who, and other similar characters where they just don't ever age, right? Because I mean, they're like Superman, right? You just never is always the same age, no matter what comic you read from what decade. It's always the same age guy. And Batman, for these guys live forever in this sense.
they're forever in their 30s.
Especially in Batman Forever.
I wanted to add before we finish the chapter that we were talking about, I think, the Aida Footer. I don't remember if that's how it's pronounced. It's
Idelfito.
yeah. It is like they Islamic religion celebrates during the Passover time, during Easter time for Christians, Eid al-Fitr, and it's the day that Ishmael wasn't sacrificed, and they celebrate, if I remember correctly, with lambs shaped out of butter. So if you look at these holy days, they the spring holy day of Easter, of Eid al-Fitr, of Passover, it's a fertility festival that we're talking about mashups that gets mashed up because lambs, and there's a sacrificed lamb for Passover too, and there's they passed over the firstborn. It's about it's birthing time of year,
And you have a big feast.
Yeah, and you have a big feast.
Yeah. And
And
the
it's
winter's over.
symbolism.
So
It's bodies,
God-
it's fertility.
God made all of these things. God made this lamb,
Mhm.
and you killed it as a sacrifice to God. And God's like, I made that, and you broke it to honor me.
God likes
and
barbecue. Loves
this is the
barbecue.
thing. These are primitive festivals that celebrate the rhythm of life. And it would be perfectly fine. It would be perfectly fine to have like eating a big feast at lambing time because there's plenty and harvest and doing all these things. These would all be perfectly fine if we didn't have to take the myths that became attached to them and treat them as both literal and inherently virtuous.
And just imagine how much different our history would be if these early people who wrote these books and everything, who had, and I realize that all of this is coming through military power.
Hmm.
If these early people had, like, if they were philosophers and they taught what truth is and what the value of it is and what the value of skepticism and critical inquiry is,
And they would have been like ancient China.
how to avoid being fooled into believing things that are not evidently true. What if we celebrated that in early history? I think, as Carl Sagan put it, our first spaceships would be returning from other stars now, and they would be bearing Greek symbols.
And this story would have been, still could have had it, but it would have had a very different meaning about not listening to voices in your head.
About how horrible
Exactly,
it is. You
yes.
just blindly obey. Maybe we wouldn't have had to learn that lesson the hard way.
Maybe if we had a culture that didn't teach blind obedience, with no reason behind it. All right, so I've got a couple more chats that I have to read. James Hogue says, "What would you say the truest story in the Bible is? Is there one?" Panel?
Truest in what sense? Like
There's got to be some truth.
truth.
I would
There's
say
gospel
that John the
truth.
Baptist. I would say that John the Baptist really existed. That
Yeah,
John the
he's
Baptist
mentioned in
had a
Josephus.
John the Baptist had a cult following, and then the Christians came along and appropriated John the Baptist because he was so popular that they said that, okay, well, now John the Baptist has to do this. We'll tell this story where John the Baptist baptizes Jesus and then tells his own followers, now you have to follow Jesus, so that everybody
Yeah.
follows Jesus instead of John. Because we noticed that the Persians, or not the Persians, there was a Persian story about a pilgrim into Islam who did the same thing, who meets Jesus, and then Jesus never died in Islam. Jesus like lives forever, and he is still in like 1200 CE. Jesus is still walking around on the earth, healing people every day. And so this pilgrim comes to him to find the truth of God, and Jesus says, "Well, I'm not the final prophet. You have to go follow Muhammad." So Jesus has now been appropriated to tell people to follow Muhammad, just like John the Baptist was appropriated to tell people to follow Jesus.
Yeah. Same thing.
So I would say that I guess the most true story, you could put this with the Babylonian exile.
Yeah.
You could say it's the Assyrian invasion. You could say it was I think it was Hezekiah who built an aqueduct.
Yes.
Which we did.
Yes.
We found it. We found the actual thing he built.
Yes, we found also an inscription there which
Yeah.
tells about how they did the aqueduct.
Yeah, exactly. So those things are, of course, true, and they're in the Bible. But
Yeah.
of course, those are also part of the Deuteronomistic history, which I would say is probably more it's much closer to truth, the Deuteronomistic history. But we also
Yeah.
have to remember that it is mythologized because that's how history used to be written. Herodotus, the father of history, he includes gods in his history, but we don't take that literally. We're just like, okay, this is how they viewed it, right? This is
Yeah.
the view. This is how they saw the cause for these things, and in the same way, the Deuteronomistic history was written. But yeah, of course, there are true things in there.
Yeah. Once you get into kings, you actually have people who you can actually verify existed. Some of the kings who reigned, you can actually,
Yeah.
there's evidence that those people existed. It's kind of sketchy before that for like the patriarchs, but
I think the first historical lineup that I'm aware of is that in I think it was Kings, they talk about how Solomon built these 3 gates. And they did actually find these 3 gates, and they're all built at the same time with the same like architectural structure, style, yada yada yada. So that is the first point where anything in the Bible is even historically plausible. Everything prior to that is almost certainly entirely mythology. If not entirely, then like vastly mythology.
Yeah, I would say maybe the existence of David, but that's as much as you can say, really.
Oh yeah,
there's-
he turned into like a psychopathic Robin Hood / it. We'll get there.
Yeah, he
There- I
was,
so much
what
he
about-
was
to
just
say
a
about him.
warlord. Yeah.
What about Solomon? I would accept that there was a King Solomon, even if we
Yeah.
don't have proof that there was a King Solomon. I
Yeah,
would
probably.
accept that there was a King Solomon, but I wouldn't accept that he had power over the wind,
Right.
and that he could talk to animals like Dr. Doolittle.
No, the heroic story arc with God grants him one wish and he wishes for wisdom. It's the classic hero's choice, and he actually makes the right one and is therefore blessed. Like that part is obviously mythological. And, as a myth is not a bad story. The idea that valuing wisdom above just short-term gain or your own ego is a good thing. But nonetheless, it is a myth.
although the demonstrations of Solomon's wisdom are a bit dubious. It's like this
Yeah.
story, like, oh, only the mother would say, "Don't kill the baby," don't cut the baby in half. That's
In fairness, in the biblical days, it seems like killing babies. Honestly, it's kind of God's favorite pastime. I'm surprised evangelicals are against abortion. They're only against abortion.
It's like they used to kill babies in Bible times, just like we used to play lawn darts in the 70s.
Pretty much. Yeah.
The
It's
story
just-
itself is about killing the son of Abraham.
Yeah. God is really into baby killing. Like,
So Trevor
it
and
is
Wright,
his jam.
indeed, Trevor and Wright says, "Do you know who officially created Christianity? Because it has contributed so much division and conflict as soon as the Roman Catholic Church emerged in history."
This
Well,
is
I think
But that's
there was a
completely
problem
different.
before. It was a problem before there was a Roman Catholic Church.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there was there was this. I believe, I don't know if it's true, but there was this Christian part, and then it was separated by the Great Schism, and then there was another schism. I don't know.
yeah, there
Uh,
were plenty of schisms.
there were many
in the
schisms.
church.
So
Yeah.
many
Weren't
schisms.
the
but-
early
I vote
Christians
Paul.
from the surrounding regions? Like Paul wrote these letters to these early churches.
Yeah.
I-
But then
It
the
is
thing is, at the time,
possible. It is possible, though I don't necessarily subscribe to this. It is possible that Paul made the whole thing up, according to some arguments that I've read online. I don't,
Oh.
like I said, I don't think that's the case, but I've heard a
It's
number
not
of people argue that it's possible.
It's not that simple, I don't think, but like he 100% is responsible for a lot of what passes for modern Christianity and theology. And by modern, I literally just mean anything after 800. This is, if it's not a single contributor, anything this vast has multiple causes and points of entry and influence, but if you're gonna peg one person who's responsible for this entire fuck up, Paul, who I would like to argue, and I will argue when we get to it, is a frickin' narcissistic ass.
Woman
I
hater.
can't wait till we get
That
to
happened
Paul.
in religion.
yeah, we're actually starting the epistles next week on Atheist Sunday School.
Yeah, if I don't have a link to your channel, I need to include that in the links to this show. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go back and look for it and make sure that I have a link to your channel, because
Kind of a-
anybody's interested in, if you want to jump ahead to see the ending of the story, spoilers, we're going to go watch
Kind of-
Lawrence's theory.
Kind of a side note to that question, the Gnostics, I think, of course, they predated the Roman Catholic Church, and they had a form of Christianity that modern Christians wouldn't recognize, and it was some kind of strange marrying of Greek thought and the Christian story that Yahweh is actually evil and narcissistic, and that this kind of explains this Abraham story too. But Yahweh thinks he's the only God, but he's only the God that created the material world.
Yeah, so you
Oh
have
yes,
the
where he was an abortion of darkness created by wisdom, sort of accidentally, without balance, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Wasn't that a great story that God was created as an abortion?
Of darkness and
I
chaos.
love that.
It makes
when
sense.
you read the Coptic Gospels, it is a hard read, and I'm sure it has a lot to do with the translation. It was a very difficult thing for me to get through, but what I managed to piece out of that was that, like, these goddesses, a collection of goddesses, create Jehovah as an abortion that they reanimated, and then they all step backward into the darkness, so that as he gains consciousness, he looks around and doesn't see anybody else, so he assumes that he's the only thing that exists.
You mean
Yeah.
he's an abortion zombie Nazi? Oh my God! It's from
The
South Park, the game, the stick of truth.
The Gnostics said something like that too, that there is a being called Sophia, which I think means wisdom, and
Sophia pops up a whole bunch of places.
and
in
she
Bible.
and she wanted to her sin was she wanted to have sex with not Yahweh, but like the actual creator of the universe, who is supposed to be better than Yahweh, and Yahweh was unaware that he was born, and he thinks he's the God.
He thinks he's the, yeah.
My takeaway from this is that God was a failed abortion.
Yeah. I just love that story because it is so jacked up.
Yeah, the history of Christianity gets kind of murky because it starts off as just you have Jewish Christians, right? They considered themselves Jews still early on. But so yeah, I would say that Paul would probably be the 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 creator of Christianity, but still there was a long way to go before we
Yeah.
got to anything recognizable. Like we have plenty of Gnostic sects, as was pointed out. We have like the Marcionites, for example.
The
Marcion,
Docetics.
yeah, Docetic. That was more like a worldview that multiple sects held. But yeah, so Marcion, he is credited with the idea of canon. He's the 1st one to actually have like a closed book, a collection of scriptures, and of course it was said by his opponents, because that's really the only thing we have, that he took a knife to the Gospels. He essentially cut out all the super Jewish stuff and made it purely Christian. Um, and he believed in two gods. There was the evil God of the Old Testament and the good God of Jesus, who came to save us from this evil God. And I do have a video on Marcion. It's really, really interesting with Marcion. But yeah, you do have these stages of evolution for Christianity until eventually you come to a unification under Constantine, of course, and Nicaea. But the evolution of Christianity would make it kind of weird to discuss, who created it. But I think Paul would be the closest answer. Yeah.
I just love that phrase, God of Jesus. It's like something that an evangelist would shout out, good God of Jesus.
Yeah, there was somebody in the comments that mentioned that there was a rumor that Paul was Josephus. Lawrence, you want to tackle that one?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't quite hear you.
Yeah, somebody in the comments mentioned a rumor that Paul was Josephus.
That Paul is Josephus. That
Yeah.
doesn't even line up.
That
Yeah,
doesn't track.
that doesn't
No.
sound right
No.
at all.
No, yeah, I mean he could have cribbed from Josephus, the author of Luke Acts, sure as fuck did. But Paul is an egotistical jackass, and in fairness to him, half the stuff that we think he wrote, he didn't actually write. So, getting into which of the epistles is authentic and how probable it is that they're authentic is going to be something to deal with when we get there. But I think we should go back to some of the comments, because we've got a whole line of comments here. I really wanted to.
We do.
Some of them are awesome.
And I cannot wait to get to Paul. I mean, Lawrence is going to glow in the dark when we get to Paul.
I'll hold him down and you hit, and then you hold him down for me.
Okay, so Miss Lud says a monotheistic God would have become a god of history. That would explain why he's so fucked up. History is. The other gods were just used to explain like natural stuff, not history.
Mm-hmm.
And then James Call offers $10. Thank you very much for that. Says, what about the lady that drowned her children and to send them to heaven before they could sin? That Andrea Yates.
Yeah.
I think I'll probably remember that name for the rest of my life.
Yes.
This happened around 2000, 2001, somewhere in there. This was the most morose story. Her children's names. There were 5 children, and she was still a young woman. She still already had 5 children as a young woman, and they were named all biblical names like Noah and Mary and Joseph and these kind of names. And then she just decided one day, while her husband was at work, that she was going to save them all from sin by rounding them up and drowning them in the bathtub one by one. And so there was some kind of testimony that I don't remember where they got this or how they could have gotten this, but that she was running around the house with the last child who had seen all of the siblings drowned, is running around trying to save himself. And of course, she captures him and drowns him too. So as disturbing as that is, the husband comes home from work, finds his house surrounded by police, and they tell him that his wife has just drowned all their children. And he's unfazed by that.
That's bizarre.
Well, yeah, she's kind of weird.
This this is the kind of stuff that you get with some of the weird Christian cults, where you get people pushed into these extremely unhealthy and abusive ways of thinking and ways of living, where relationships and marriages are abusive by design. Like, this script is inherently abusive, and people snap. And what she did is incredibly evil and fucked up, but it's also totally in line with her theology. It
Yep.
completely rationally follows from it. And the fact that her husband wasn't phased means they were probably both members of some kind of group that had one of these really abusive, toxic, not just theologies. They have a whole script of life, like your Quiverfuls and your Duggar types and whatnot. And
The
and it's
sad thing,
just the
it
worst.
really.
Yeah, no, that
Go-
is the same thing, at least in part. But it's just the worst possible way to live. And it breaks
Well,
people's minds. And then they
I'm
do
sorry.
things like this.
I keep jumping in when I think the point is done. I
I'm
apologize for
sorry.
that. My problem with Andrea Yates wasn't just that she's this weird psycho bitch. That my problem was that she's not alone. I've run into fuck tons of study of other stories of people trying to save their kids from Satan or save their kids from
Yeah.
sin by slitting their throats with a box cutter. There was one woman that laid down her 3 daughters in the garage on the floor and slit all their throats with a box cutter. And there was another one who staved in all 3 of her sons' heads with a rock, all to save them from Satan, an imaginary character who never existed. Grow the fuck up, pull your head out of your ass, and stop believing in fairy tales. Stop killing your kids over a magical fantasy.
Yeah, and this
Anyway.
is the difference between Abraham and the people nowadays. You do that kind of stuff nowadays, you end up being arrested, you get psychiatric help. Abraham, on the other hand, is lauded as a hero.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what's so utterly morbid about the story we just read. All right, moving on to the next comment. Kicker White Lion for 50 Czechoslovenian kroner.
Fuck you. I'm sorry. I love Aaron, but I knew you would do this.
Tomer has not seen Lord of the Rings? Unacceptable. We need a 12-hour watch party and correct this mistake.
Well, I don't. I'm sorry for all the geek fans, but I don't like fantasy. I just don't. Yeah,
I
don't
get
find
that.
it.
I
don't find
really
it
do.
entertaining.
But
So,
you
No,
read the
I
Bible.
don't.
Yes.
I don't like fantasy either. It was a well done movie. I'll give it that.
I'm like
Okay.
the more boring stuff. I like Dostoevsky and James Joyce and Franz Kafka, not these dragons and shit.
But I think Lord of the Rings may have been based on the oral traditions of maybe Nordic people. I forget where Tolkien, but a lot of the
Yeah.
didn't survive.
Well, we know where he
Studied a lot
got the idea of
mythology.
Moria.
Yeah.
It's
There's a lot of
mythology.
Germanic stuff in it. Yeah, it's Germanic stuff, and it's like Middle Earth is an English translation of Midgard from
Yeah,
Norse
yeah.
Gotcha.
mythology.
The best fantasy is based in mythology.
So then Rico's
for the Bible.
Postmodern Life, which obviously is a play off of Rocco's Modern Life, which was an interesting cartoon. It says, could it be that Yahweh is the way I like to pronounce the Tetragrammaton, was phonetically something, excuse me.
It wasn't
Yeah, that's how
something-
you say this.
Yeah, that's the Hebrew pronunciation. Was phonetically something like Yahweh, all vowels? No, it wasn't all vowels. I will continue with the question. And that's why it was so special a word to those Abjad writing primitives.
That's the type of alphabet as an abjad. It's consonants.
What I read, and I can't remember what it was that I read, and it was many years ago that I read this, but they said that the name, the pronunciation of Yehovah was something that you said automatically as in your breath as you're trudging along, like on hikes or whatever, as you're running out of breath, you would say the word Yehovah, Yehovah over and over again. And they wanted to keep the vowels secret because you can't know God's name, because if anybody knows God's name, it gives them special magical abilities, like the ability to fly, for example, in the case of Lilith.
Or it gives them power over that guy, because in the ancient Near East and in Egypt as well, their names have like some incredible power. I go into this a
Yeah.
little bit in my Suffering Servant video, but when it
Yeah.
comes to the so for pharaohs, for example, they had a throne name and they had a real name. And only the pharaoh and the pharaoh's mother knew the pharaoh's real name, because if you did know the pharaoh's real name, you could cast a spell against him or something.
Yeah.
That seems to be a pretty universal mythology, the idea of the true name having power over you. You see it, like, it's part of Japanese mythology too in some cases. Like, it seems to be pretty universal across the world, the idea of magical
Lilith's
power and the true
story.
name.
Lilith
And
knew
I
the true name of God.
Sorry?
Lilith knew the true name of God, and she
Damn
grew
right.
wings and left the
Well,
Garden of Eden.
I had to get out somehow, and
Yeah.
I wasn't sticking around with that loser.
Yeah.
So I went off to party with Samael, and we're having a good time.
Yeah.
But but I've actually heard one Jewish person was being interviewed about, about the concept of Jesus and that just what they thought. And he said that Jesus had gone into a temple ceremony and had the proper name of God, the true name, written on a bracelet. And you couldn't say it, but you could wear it for these special ceremonies. And then when he left the temple, he forgot to take it off. And that's what gave him the magical power to heal.
Was it one of
And
those bracelets like what would Jesus do, only with what would Yahweh do?
Kind of, because
I mean,
I understand that Hebrew. Tomer, yeah, please correct me. Does Hebrew have vowels in it?
Yes.
Okay, because somebody said that they didn't, and I was just having problems with that. Because if the Tetragrammaton intentionally removed the vowels, how would that work if Hebrew didn't have vowels? But somebody was arguing that Hebrew didn't have vowels. So
Right.
Well,
So
there are
the
words
thing
that.
is,
Well, there are.
there's the consonantal text, right, which is just the
Yeah.
consonants.
Hebrew and
I mean,
Hebrew and Arabic, they most of the vowels aren't their own letter. They're little like they're little accent marks between the consonants.
oh,
and at least at one point in history, they would not have been written. Like, they didn't have written vowels. Obviously, they had vowels.
Mhm.
You need them for pronunciation. But
I want to say two things about it. First, there are words in Hebrew that don't have vowels. For example, the word for camel, gamal, doesn't have vowels. And the second thing is we have a thing called nikud, which symbolizes
Yeah.
how vocalization happens in Hebrew. So, yeah, we
Think
don't
of it.
because of
Sorry.
yes. No, go on.
I was going to say, I think I read that it was the Masoretes who produced the Masoretic text who came up with Nikud.
Yeah, so that's how you use the nikud to pronounce stuff. So with the nikud in the word of God, it's Yehovah. That's how you
Yeah.
pronounce.
okay.
But interestingly, there are several Jewish areas where the nikud is said differently. But I won't go on this.
Well,
Okay, I'm going to
think
jump
of
to
this
another.
too. They would handprint these texts, and to put all these little dots and everything for the voweling was really hard. Even I think in some Arabic newspapers today they don't do the voweling marks
No,
because
generally
because they know from the context what vowel it is.
Yeah, but Hebrew speakers know what it means, so they don't need
exactly.
They don't need
it
them.
very much.
So then Matt White says, "For it is written, when King Aaron gathers together two or more, then they shall perform the parrot sketch. It's an ex-parrot. It has ceased to be." And then Jacques Polymer says, Aaron, Lilith, Lorence, Tomer, JR, and our lovely and informative Lalandra, I'll do penance and watch the whole show later. And then Max XTC for $5, thank you, says David Berkowitz, Jeffrey Dahmer, Chris Watts, Ted Bundy, Charles Tex Watson should all be in heaven because they accepted Jesus Christ while in jail. Yeah, so they're up there with Hitler, who had already accepted Jesus before he died, or before he was a problem. Max XCT gives $5 for that. Thank you very much. And Angel Bender. I'm sorry, Angle Bender.
Is this a Sodom and Gomorrah reference?
I just got such a visual on an angel bender. But okay, I get Angle Bender. So we're talking about a robot here with a snotty attitude who smokes cigars. What do you think about Joseph Atwill's assertion that Titus Flavian is Jesus? I think it's bullshit.
Yeah, it is. It is bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
He fell into the biggest trap that I see religious studies students falling in, the trap of parallelomania, where they find parallels and without checking it against anything else, they stick it together and say, look, this must be the same or this must be linked somehow necessarily. And I'm like, no, not necessarily. So many people have written about this. I mean, hell, both mythicists and non-mythicists have written about this. Richard Carrier saying it's bullshit. You have Bart Ehrman saying it's bullshit. And when you can get those two guys to agree on something like this, hey, you know what? Maybe.
If you could get Carrier and Ehrman to agree on anything, it's canon.
That's just a beautiful concept. Richard Carrier and Herman both agree that's bullshit.
Yeah, it's bullshit.
I want to have a little bit of empathy for Atwill. I mean, just think about the fact that the reason anybody knows his name is because of this. Now, I've said some things in my 25 years of activism. I've made a couple of statements and videos that were factually incorrect, and I had been corrected on them. Okay, I can accept that and move on, and I can not repeat that same mistake. But imagine if the entirety of your fame is all of it is wholly based on one error
that you just keep repeating. So what you're saying is he's an apologist?
I feel sorry for the guy, because how can you come back from that? I'm sorry, just everything about my entire worth is wrong.
It's basically his Ray Comfort banana.
Yeah. So M. Doug offers
Yeah,
£5.
Sorry, just one thing, Aaron. Notice that all the people who tend to agree with that are people who don't actually know about like ancient Rome. All the people that do tend to buy into it have no knowledge in the subject.
Yeah,
So
because that's not how Roman thinking worked about religions.
Mm.
They were eminently practical about religions. You just you did your loyalty stuff and you paid your taxes and you didn't cause trouble and we don't give a fuck. So fuck off.
Now, I can see later Roman influences having a lot of tailoring in the formation of the early Christian church, but not like this. So then M. Doug offers £5 and said, "There's a record of Rome attacking I'm feeling like an idiot, a Marcian town, blinding all but one man, cutting out his tongue, and then banishing them. Yahweh would have been so proud."
Dude, he really would have. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how they got to a Martian town.
I think he's referring.
Ancient aliens didn't just build the pyramids.
I think he's referring to the Mausi, which is a Latin exonym for an Italic people of ancient Italy, whose chief center was Maruvium on the eastern shore of Lake Fucinus.
Of Lake Fuck You.
I thought he said fuck anus. Lake fuck anus.
Oh, maybe it's Fucinus. I don't know.
Can I get a villa on the shores of Lake Fuck You?
You can, but it'll cost an eye and a tongue.
Okay, then Letefta says, Peter Atkins, all religions pride themselves in making analogies, usually after the truth has been discovered by a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and most of your prophecies are written that way, to be sure. And not just in Christianity either. Hinduism did the same thing. Retrofitted a lot of their prophecies as well.
Islam does the same thing to this day. It's just always been like that.
Yeah. And that's the problem when you start off with the scripture being true. you've got to find some way to make it fit with what we know now.
All right, so clearly we are 10 minutes over time. Obviously, not going to get to Genesis 23 today.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
wanna-
because I had for this chapter, I had only 2 pages of commentary. I don't really have a lot to say about this chapter because it's not very interesting. And I had prepared a picture, but it'll be in next time.
Okay.
know,
Well,
we
we will.
Yeah.
I
and-
want to convey a heartfelt thank you for everybody that is on this team. That, and as I said, I personally invited Lorence because I knew what he was capable of and I knew what his value would be. But I'm also pleased that the others have assembled themselves through their own interest, and I think I have quite a good team here. And I'm going to love on you even more if I get another beer in me.
Well, okay. How about this then? Since Jeffrey Dahmer's in heaven and none of us want to go hang out with him, party bus to hell, and everyone brings a little something for the bar.
I'll bring some
down.
scotch.
All right. So see you next week for Genesis 23.
Thank you very much.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and make sure. I don't exactly. What time is your show tomorrow, Arn?
Oh, tomorrow for the Book of Mormon?
Yeah.
That'll be 2 p.m. Central, so 3 Eastern and noon Pacific.
Okay, so before his show, you know what the audience should do? They should go to my show, Atheist Sunday School, for an hour. They should stick around for a little bit. Should do that.
I always
get
have a Sunday school I can go to in my pajamas.
How do you get through any of these in a single hour?
Listen. Okay, so if I wanted to fill it with because I tend to just keep the commentary down to the important stuff, like the really big stuff, because like if I did do like a word by word, verse by verse thing, when it didn't really have too much of a purpose, then it would take 2 or 3 hours to go over a chapter. But
Like
because
what we do now.
yeah, exactly. But like there's still value in that. I get it. So I'm not really super mad about it. But like since I do want to get through the readings, we do like 3 or 4 chapters. Tomorrow we'll be going over the last 4 chapters of Acts. So we'll be finishing up Acts tomorrow. But we have so many commentaries on the table. We have both secular commentaries and we have religious commentaries. We also have I have the Greek text on me, so if there's ever any confusion, I can just check the Greek. And I also have textual guides to the Greek to check against different manuscript evidence. So there's a lot that's included, and potentially we could go much more in depth. But I also work on Sundays, so
I get what you're saying. I once had Greek text on me too, and that's you can't just wipe that off.
Oh, you guys are the best. And I see you, ugly German truths.
Okay, so I'm going to go find Lawrence's link, and if you're watching this not live, but if you're watching this recorded, then Lawrence's link will be in here, and I will make sure that his channel link will be in all future shows here.
It's
so
in
you
the
can follow what
chat
he's doing.
3 times already, Arn. I put all of Lawrence's links in the chat.
Thank you much.
At least 3 times. And there's a last message you may want to end with. And another thing, can you not tease Tomer anymore? Because I had to fight off an angry dog who was born in the Slovak Republic. Not kidding.
Okay.
Not kidding.
Okay, so Ugly German Truths says you should let Lilith know that there being a highway to hell, but only a stairway to heaven is saying Sith?
I think something. Yeah,
something about how much traffic is expected. Yeah, I get that.
Hence the party bus.
Yeah, I want to brag. I've been on the highway to hell a couple of times. Yep, in both Norway and in Michigan.
Nice. There you go.
I've been to hell and back.
And there's a famous picture of
Super
Arn
colorful,
in
I've never
front
seen
of
it.
God's expedition.
To Hell and Back is also a very good song by Sabaton, by the way.
Yeah, you mentioned them before, and I've heard them since. I get your recommendation. They are a pretty good band.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll close it up. See everybody next week. Go watch Lawrence's show tomorrow before my Bible, or excuse me, before my Book of Mormon lessons, and the link will be in the description. Thank you much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye for now.